You're listening to The Stephen Torriello Show, building a platform of liberty for people in search of truth with a dash of hope and a life worth living. The Stephen Torriello Show. And now, here's Stephen.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the show. As always, thank you for tuning in. And let me get my stuff situated here. So, I actually wanted to start the show out with this. So, what is entrapment? All right, I know it's a weird way to start the show, different than what we normally do, but I feel like the topic we're going to be heading into is going to be, it's all revolved around entrapment. What is the legal definition of entrapment? And so I actually went and dug up the legal definition for entrapment, and there's differences. It's a kind of a nuanced thing, and I feel like my listeners and all Americans should be very aware and up to date with what is entrapment exactly, because in a tyrannical regime, which is what we're starting to witness here in this country, they use laws like entrapment in order to, fudge real justice, in order to get around real justice, to essentially imprison people and strip away their rights without actually having committed a crime. And they do that with entrapment. And so I want to read the legal definition of entrapment before we get into this next story. So the exact legal definition of entrapment can vary slightly between jurisdictions, but it is generally defined by case law and statutory provisions. In the United States, entrapment is typically defined by the federal and state laws as well as judicial interpretations. Entrapment occurs when law enforcement agents induce a person to commit a criminal offense that the person would otherwise have been unlikely to commit. All right, so that is the kind of, generalization of entrapment based off of two Supreme Court cases, which we're going to get into in just a second. I want to read all this stuff to you because it's very important for people to know exactly what is going on here. All right, so the federal definition under U.S. federal entrapment, so under U.S. federal law, entrapment is an affirmative defense that requires proving two elements. Number one, inducement. Government agents induced the defendant to commit the crime. Number two, lack of predisposition. The defendant was not predisposed to commit the crime before the government's inducement. All right, that's pretty understandable, right? So like if this person comes along, all right, some random FBI undercover agent, and the defendant doesn't know that person's an undercover agent, and that agent says, something like, man, it would be pretty awesome if we went and kidnapped the governor of Michigan, wouldn't it? That'd be pretty cool. Maybe we should do that. Like, that would be considered entrapment, because that person who is just minding their own business, and even if they weren't minding their own business, say they were talking about it or they brought it up in passing, and the federal agent, the undercover FBI agent, actually forces that person into committing that crime. Not forces, but maybe incentivizes or coerces that person to commit that crime. So just like the case law says, if that person wouldn't have committed that crime without the involvement of that undercover agent, then that is entrapment. All right, pretty understandable. Here are the case law definitions. So in Sorrells v. United States, that's a really weird name, Sorrells. So in Sorrells v. United States in 1932, the Supreme Court held that entrapment occurs when the criminal conduct is the product of the creative activity of law enforcement officials. All right, yeah, I get that. And then in Jacobson v. United States in 1992, the court emphasized that entrapment focuses on the intent of the defendant, concluding that government inducement and the defendant's lack of predisposition are critical elements. So it is kind of nuanced, ain't it? I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of vague. It leaves a lot of openings for, let's say, a weaponized intel agency like the FBI to kind of wiggle their way in and really strip somebody away from their freedoms if they wanted to, against their will, against the law. And they can do that very easily with these entrapment laws. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening between the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, where the defendants were, I think most of them, if not all of them, the cases have been dismissed. Mistrials have taken place. A few of them got off on entrapment. It was a flipping disaster because there was like 12 undercover FBI agents and like 5 or 6 defendants. And so essentially what they were saying in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, which we talked about this in previous shows, is none of these defendants would have done this crime, would have committed this crime or tried to kidnap the governor if not for the FBI coming in and kind of coercing them and clearing the path for them to do it. And then they arrest them when these people go on to do it. This is what our FBI is doing. And I think it's very important for everybody to know this, because what the FBI is doing right now is they're sending undercover agents into gun shows. Yes, so they are on the hunt for gun shows and people buying guns illegally, or just in this person's case, the story we're getting ready to get into, trying to persuade people or entrap them at gun shows, whether it's, selling guns, illegal guns, trafficking guns, whatever it is. But I find it very, very disheartening that we have an FBI that has so much money, a massive budget, that is supposed to be there to protect the American people, are actually seemingly running out of things to do because now they're working on entrapments against American citizens. And I'm going to explain it to you in just a little bit, but I want to finish this first. So, an example of statutory definition. So many states have codified the concept of entrapment in their criminal statutes. For example, the Model Penal Code provides a useful framework often adopted in various forms by state legislatures. So Model Penal Code Section 2.13, entrapment, a public law enforcement official or a person acting in cooperation with such an official perpetrates an entrapment if the purpose of obtaining evidence of the commission of an offense. He induces or encourages another person to engage in conduct constituting such offense by either A, making knowingly false representations designed to induce the belief that such conduct is not prohibited, or B, employing methods of persuasion or inducement which create a substantial risk that such an offense will be committed by persons other than those who are ready to commit it. All right, so there you go. So that is the federal code, both in state legislatures and federal penal code. You heard 2 court cases, Supreme Court cases, and that's pretty much broke it down. Well, I got a story here. This is the whole reason why I read entrapment laws. This is from the Huffington Post. This came out June 13th. An Arizona man has been indicted after plotting mass shooting to incite a race war before the election. That is what the FBI is telling us. This was a grand jury that has now officially charged this man. A federal grand jury has indicted an Arizona gun vendor for allegedly selling firearms to be used in a mass shooting he was planning in hopes of inciting a race war ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Authorities said Mark Adams Prieto, 58, of Prescott, was indicted Tuesday on charges of firearms trafficking, transfer of a firearm for use in a hate crime, and possession of an unregistered firearm, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona announced. Prieto was taken into custody in New Mexico on May 14 after allegedly supplying rifles to an informant, an undercover agent, while plotting out an attack on African Americans and other minorities at a concert in Atlanta. I have to say, folks, this sounds a whole lot like the FBI set this guy up. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. Why do we have our own intel agencies setting traps for American citizens? Because that's what this sounds like. So according to federal prosecutors, Prieto told individuals who he met while selling at gun shows that he hoped to, quote, kill as many people as possible and leave Confederate flags, Ku Klux Klan propaganda, and other, quote, offensive rhetoric at the scene of the shooting in order to incite retaliation and start a race war. In his mind, it had unequivocally be perceived as race-related. He expressed frustration with the direction the country is going and a willingness to do violence to change its direction, prosecutor said in May 17th court document arguing for his detention pending trial. Prieto allegedly personally chose the city where the shooting would take place and the specific guns that the trio would use in their attack. When one of the other two participants said they did not have an AR-15 rifle, which was the firearm Prieto wanted everyone to use, Prieto supplied them with one. Prosecutor said. Quote, Prieto did not know the individuals were working with the government, but instead believed that they shared his racist beliefs and wanted to commit a mass shooting and incite a race war, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona said in a statement announcing his indictment. Prieto was ultimately arrested while driving east from Arizona through New Mexico. In his vehicle, authorities said they found 7 firearms, which he said he was taking to a gun show in Florida where his mother lives. The government agent and informant said Prieto told him he was heading to Atlanta to do reconnaissance. The concert selected for the attack was scheduled to run from May 14th through May 15th. Authorities searched his Prescott home, which he shared with an elderly man, and recovered approximately 178 firearms. Damn. These included some suspected automatic firearms and short-barreled rifles, which are illegal to possess without proper registration, prosecutor said. In an interview with federal agents, Prieto admitted to planning a mass casualty event in Atlanta, but said that it was only a fantasy and something he never would have actually done. He said he planned to call it all off when he regrouped with the 2 individuals at a gun show in June, authorities said. Prieto's defense attorney is requesting his pretrial release last month, argued that the federal government had not presented adequate proof that his plot wasn't more than a fantasy or that he is a flight risk or danger to the public. His alleged racist beliefs, quote, even if true, also should not be a basis for denying him bail, they added. A judge disagreed and ordered Prieto to remain jailed, citing the strong weight of the evidence against him and that the lengthy prison sentence he faces if convicted. Each conviction of firearms trafficking and transfer of a firearm for use in a hate crime carries a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. A conviction for possession of an unregistered firearm carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison, the U.S. Attorney's Office said. Prieto's attorney did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Thursday. So, think about this, folks. There is alarm bells going off all over this. I find it very, very hard to believe that this guy just went up to random people he didn't know and said, yes, I'm planning a mass shooting at a concert in Atlanta, and I want you to help me. Like, does anybody really believe like that's how the conversation went down? This is what I'm talking about, and this is exactly why I'm talking about it on the show. My fellow Americans, you must be vigilant. We have an intel agency that has all the weapons and all the tricks up its sleeve that we gave to it. And they are now so bored, I guess. They don't have anything to do is what it seems like. Why are they going to gun shows, trying to entrap people? I mean, it's as simple as that. What are these people doing at gun shows? How did this conversation start? There's a lot of questions here. And I mean, the guy had a fantasy of a mass shooting. Like, this is what's so crazy. Have you ever been sitting around with friends and talking about the mass shootings that have happened and how you would retaliate against a mass shooter or something like that? Like, you know, a lot of us, we think about that stuff. When there's a mass shooting that takes place, we're like, man, if I was there and I had my piece with me, I would do this. I would seek cover. I would help people out, whatever it is. You're fantasizing about what you would do if you were in that situation. So are you telling me, like, you can now be arrested, or not even arrested, but you can be investigated? Like, how is it that these 2 undercover FBI agents just so happen to be investigating this guy? Like I said, there's a lot of holes in this story. And you know what? It sounds a whole lot like the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. Again, where most of the defendants got off on entrapment because the FBI entrapped them. In other words, they wouldn't have committed the crime, they wouldn't have carried out the crime if not for the FBI getting involved. So, I mean, why am I to believe that this is any different? I don't believe it. I think the FBI is going to these gun shows and they're trying to, first of all, we all know that the FBI is political. And I don't know about you, but I guarantee you the left, when talking about this story, because this really hasn't hit the mainstream yet, his charges actually came out a few days ago. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh yeah, look at this Trump supporter. He must be a Trump voter that was planning on a mass shooting against black people at a concert in Atlanta. This is how sick Donald Trump voters are. This is what Republicans do. Like, this is what the FBI is doing now. It is a completely politicized intel agency. We know this. The Hunter Biden laptop, to the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, to the false flag operation on January 6th, all the undercover agents there with Stephen D'Antuono. I mean, go down the list, man, of all the times that the FBI has been caught entrapping people, setting up these stings, ruining people's lives. Like, this is why I say we must liquidate the FBI. There's no other way around this. I know there's good people in the ranks. I'm a firm believer. I'm one of those people that say the FBI can't be fixed. It can't be. And trust me, there's a lot of other people out there that feel the same way as I do. Some people think that you can fix it, but just, purging out the upper echelons of the FBI. Not me. I think the whole thing is rotten to the core, and it needs to be just dug out. It needs to be pulled out root and branch. The whole thing needs to be dismantled, and then all the ongoing cases needs to be spread out to other agencies. That's how I feel. The FBI needs to go. It has way too big of a budget. Apparently, it doesn't have anything better to do than to go to gun shows and entrap people. But as of right now, he is charged and he is sitting in prison. So I went and pulled up the grand jury charges. This was from Julie Kelly off of Twitter, who's doing an amazing job, by the way, when it comes to these entrapment cases, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. You could say she's a skeptical American citizen when it comes to our intel agencies, much like me. Anyways, I pulled this off of her Twitter, and this is in regards to the case. These are the grand jury charges. So, charge number 1, it says between January 2024 and May 2024, the defendant Mark Adams Prieto had discussions with a source working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and an FBI undercover to devise a plan to commit a mass shooting of African Americans and other minorities to incite a race war prior to the 2024 United States presidential election. Prieto did not know that the source and undercover were government agents. Prieto believed that the source and the undercover shared his racist beliefs and wanted to commit a mass shooting to incite a race war. So how did this conversation start? You know what I mean? Like, do you just go up to random people at a gun show and say, hey, man, you want to start a race war? So this is what I'm talking about, man. And because the FBI has completely ruined its trust and credibility with the American people, these are the questions we ask. If I would have been reading this story 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I absolutely would have been on the side of the FBI. I would have said, this guy's a dirtbag. I can't believe that we have racist people out there that would plan mass shootings. But now after what they did to Donald Trump with the illegal FISA warrants, the spying, James Comey, Clapper, Brennan, the Gretchen kidnapping plot, all this stuff, January 6th, these people have absolutely no credibility with me. None. And in fact, I see them as a threat to the American people and to the American society and culture. This is what happens when you have a rogue government institution that has unlimited funding, that has no leash whatsoever. It is not answerable to anybody. There's no transparency. It is essentially a rogue government institution that has massive power over the American people. This is what's concerning. So to continue on with this document, there was an interesting spot on this charging document. Prieto, the source, and the undercover had multiple discussions on how they were going to commit the mass shooting. The discussions occurred at gun shows in Phoenix, Prescott Valley, and Tucson in Arizona between 2024 and May 2024. Prior to January 2024, Prieto made statements to the source about carrying out a mass shooting targeting African Americans, Jews, and Muslims. Number 3, a concert in Atlanta, Georgia on May 14th and May 15th was the chosen event where the mass shooting was going to be committed. The concert in Atlanta was chosen because Prieto expected large numbers of African Americans and other minorities to attend. Number 4, Prieto, the source, and the undercover had discussions that included, but were not limited to, the vehicle they would drive from Arizona, the route they would take, their cover story if they were stopped by law enforcement, the items they needed for the trip, the guns they would use to commit the attack, what they would wear to commit the attack, propaganda and sound equipment that they would use for messaging during the attack, their escape plan, and their attack plan at the venue. During the January 2024 gun show in Phoenix, Prieto talked to the undercover and the source about the benefits of using an AK platform rifle for the mass shooting. On February 25th, at the gun show in Phoenix, Prieto sold the undercover a Nodak Spud. I don't know what that is. I guess that's an AK-47 rifle. It is, yeah. AK-47 rifle model NDS-1KP serial number, blah, 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 blah. Number 6, on March 23rd, 2024, at a gun show in Prescott Valley, Prieto told the undercover not to use the AK platform rifle that the undercover previously purchased from Prieto for the mass shooting because it was traceable and too valuable. Prieto told the undercover that the undercover needed a firearm that was not traceable, priced at the mid-range and reliable. Prieto said that he believed that an AR platform rifle would be better for the mass shooting than an AK platform. The undercover asked Prieto for an AR rifle that could not be traced back to the undercover to use for the mass shooting. Prieto told the undercover that he would bring a rifle for the undercover following the day. Number 7. On March 24th, Prieto and the undercover agreed the previous day Prieto brought to the gun show a Quinton Defense AR-15 rifle model QD-15 serial number, blah, 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 blah. Prieto sold the AR-15 rifle to the undercover for $1,000. Later, while discussing the mass shooting, Prieto told the undercover to use the AR rifle for the mass shooting. I don't know, folks. This just sounds like it's just one gigantic setup. That's all I can say, man. And like I said, I wouldn't even feel this way if it wasn't for everything the FBI has done to American citizens, man. I think the Gretchen kidnapping plot was by far a wake-up call for me, as far as when I determined that the FBI must be dismantled. There's no fixing the FBI. When you read into that story, and like I said, we talked about this months ago, and in fact, I'm pretty sure there's 2 more going for a retrial because there was a mistrial. There was 2 of the defendants that were released on entrapment. I don't know the outcome of the case, but it is still going. It is still ongoing, and they're going to retry him again. And mind you, this is in Washington D.C. too, by the way. So it's like, you know. And don't people find it a little bit coincidental that Stephen D'Antuono was the lead FBI office branch coordinator, whatever he was. So he was the lead FBI agent for the Michigan branch. After the Gretchen kidnapping plot, before January 6th, he was transferred down to Washington, D.C. Like, nobody finds that a little bit coincidental. So Stephen D'Antuono creates this massive plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. It completely collapses. Okay, you got defendants getting off on entrapment. They can't prove the case in the court of law. And you would think someone like that, you would think the person leading that effort would get fired, right? Would at least get demoted. No, he gets promoted. And they send him to Washington, D.C. The King Kahunas, like that is the place you want to go as a lead FBI agent, is in Washington, D.C. field office. So he gets promoted, and he just so happens to get promoted months before the January 6th riot. Like, dude, and not only that, but after Stephen D'Antuono retires, he tells investigators that there were so many undercover agents that day on January 6th that they lost count. That's where that quote comes from. It comes from him. So who do you think would know how many agents they had there that day? Probably the guy that was leading up the Washington field office, right? Yeah, well, that's what he said. So this is what I'm saying. It's like, we have an FBI, an intel agency that is so big and out of control that they're now becoming a threat to people's liberties, man. I'm not saying that this Prieto guy didn't do everything that the charging documents say he did. I'm not saying that. He very well may have had this conversation, but I find it very, very, I just find the conversation very awkward, right? At a gun show? Really? How many of my listeners have went to gun shows? Are you going to vendors and are they telling you how they want to commit mass shootings? Just something doesn't sound right with this entire story, man. And I have a feeling, I would bet very, very large sums of money that this is going to get turned around on entrapment. That's all. That's all I'm saying. And you know what? I'm not the only one that says that. Julie Kelly says the same thing. And in fact, I want to read a couple tweets from her because this is kind of a big deal for people, man. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with the Trump case, with all this other crap that's going on. Information's coming at us like out of a fire hose. But it's important for people to read into these things too, because I know my audience is probably most likely very, 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 very adamant about exercising their Second Amendment right. And so I want my listeners to be aware, be vigilant. You go to these gun shows, just know that there may be undercover FBI agents there that want to strike up a conversation with you about starting a mass shooting. So just listen, just keep your head on a swivel, man. I assure you, the FBI is not here to protect us Trump voters, us Republicans, us conservatives. Now, Democrats, that's a different story. Just ask Joe Biden. So to get into some of what Julie Kelly said about this piece, about this case. So she said about 6 hours ago, I really hope the judges on the Sixth Circuit considering whether to order a third trial for 2 men convicted in Whitmer Fednapping hoax. Read this. So the judges appear poised to vacate the convictions of Adam Fox and Barry Croft and require trial judge to enter into evidence hundreds of comms between FBI handlers and their informants that demonstrated the entrapment scheme. Yeah, so the trial judge refused to let the jury in 2 trials see the messages. Fox and Croft got a hung jury after first trial, convicted at retrial. All right, so there you go. So these 2 guys, the 2 defendants, the last remaining people that got a mistrial, okay, all the other people got off on entrapment except these 2. And then the first case, it was a hung jury, and so the federal government brought them in again, and then they actually got a conviction. But during both of the trials, according to Julie Kelly, they're not allowing in these messages, the communications between the FBI and their undercover agents, the ones that were actually on the inside, that were planning this whole plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. Why wouldn't you want those messages induced as evidence? Like, I'm sorry, folks, but if I'm a defendant and I know that these undercover agents, like the whole thing was their idea, right? If they were coercing me and they were doing this, like, I want those messages as evidence. And don't people find it a little bit odd that in 2 trials, they're not allowed to induce this evidence? What is going on here? This is crazy. So a trial judge refused to let the jury in 2 trials see the messages. Fox and Croft got a hung jury on the first trial, convicted at retrial. And that's where she started talking about this case. And in fact, this case right here is what brought up this whole topic about Gretchen Whitmer again. Because what is the common theme that we see with all these events that have taken place the last few years? Between January 6th, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, and now this guy at the gun show, is the FBI and their undercover agents. And I already read you the law about entrapment. But if these undercover agents are going in there and coercing these people into committing a crime they wouldn't have otherwise committed, that's entrapment. And what I find very frustrating and almost, just kind of corrupt, is that why, if there's communications between the undercover and the FBI, why aren't these judges allowing those messages and those communications in as evidence? Like, that's just wild to me. if the FBI had conducted this investigation properly, if they believed they did not entrap this person, then you would think they would want to release the messages, right? I mean, that's how I would feel about the whole thing. If I was an undercover agent and I knew for a fact that I did not entrap this person, I would say, read the messages. Let's read the messages. This is what the guy said. This is what the FBI told me to do as an undercover agent. Read the messages. But yet they're not allowing these messages in the trial. Why? That is evidence, man. Like, I just feel like the judges and the circuit courts, these courts happening, these federal judges, they all got to go, man. Like, our entire justice system is rotten to the core with politics. That's what I think. You have judges that are like activists now. They are political activists, not judges. When you have a judge that won't allow communication messages between the FBI and the undercover agent, the judges are there to protect the defendant, not help the prosecution. That's what I think a lot of people get wrong. Like, the judge is there. Like, what is a judge's job, right? That is the main question. What are they supposed to do as a judge? They are supposed to protect the rights of the defendant. They're supposed to see the trial. They're supposed to oversee the trial and make sure there's nothing getting submitted, that there's nobody's rights getting violated, there's nothing the prosecution team is doing that they're not supposed to be doing. You know, the perfect example of this was the judge in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. You guys remember that judge? That judge was phenomenal. He railed back against the prosecution and he railed back against the defense. But he was fair. All right, that is the biggest problem we are having with all these judges in all these cases. There's no fairness anymore. You have essentially judges now that are working on behalf of the prosecution. They're not there to protect the rights of the defendant, the American people, right? Everybody's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And while the prosecution is trying to convince a jury that this person is guilty, the judge is supposed to be there to make sure everything is on the up and up. The judge is supposed to be there to make sure that the prosecution is not doing anything they're not supposed to be doing. In other words, the judge is there to protect the defendant, not be a member of the prosecution. And it seems like that's what we have in all these federal cases. Between the Trump case, between the case in New York, that judge, Judge Merchan, was essentially part of the prosecution team in that case. And that case is going to get thrown out. They know that. Not until after the election, but they know it's going to get reversed. But you had a judge that was actually part of the prosecution team. That's not a fair trial. I mean, the Judge Engeron in that stupid E. Jean Carroll case, where you had this woman that Donald Trump claimed he never met. There was no witnesses of this event ever happening, no audio, no video, and she couldn't even remember the time frame. Like, for real? And a judge is going to allow that to go through? Like, this is what I'm talking about. So we have judges now that are political activists, and they're no longer there to have proper oversight of justice, but they are there to see that a guilty verdict. That is what they want. So they're like, okay, listen, judge, we need this guy to be guilty. Make it happen. And listen, a judge, in my opinion, a judge has way too much power. That, like, I never could have imagined that a judge has this much power. And so what do you get? You get exactly what happened in the show trial in New York. You get a radical judge, right, that voted for Joe Biden's campaign. You get a Democratic district attorney, Alvin Bragg, that campaigned on getting Donald Trump. You get an appellate court that just lets this judge have free reign over everything, violating Donald Trump's due process, violating his First Amendment rights with the gag order, like all these things that the judge did, violating Donald Trump's rights. And nobody was there to protect him. The appellate court didn't protect him. That's what their job is supposed to be. But what happened? They wanted Donald Trump to be guilty. They were biased. They thought they know in their hearts Donald Trump is guilty. But that's not how any of this works. They should have recused themselves. And this is one of the main reasons why you don't prosecute a former president. Because it's just too political, man. No matter who you are, you're going to have an opinion on if that person, you're going to have an opinion on that person. You're going to have a bias against a president. Was he a good president? Was he a bad president? That's why you don't prosecute former presidents, man. Because there's no way judges are going to be fair. And the judges in all of Trump's cases are just not fair. Except for who? Judge Eileen Cannon. You know, the one that's actually protecting Donald Trump's rights? Not doing him any favors, but making sure that the prosecution doesn't overstep its authority, doesn't overstep its power, and keeping the prosecution in check, protecting the defendant, the American citizen. That is the job of a judge. I mean, this is so crazy, man. And I'm not a lawyer, man. You don't have to be a lawyer to know this stuff. Like, this is stuff every American citizen should know. And it's really easy to find all this stuff. Every American citizen, this is why I say they should have a standard, it's supposed to be civics, but they should have a standard law class that every student has to take in order to pass high school, in order to graduate. That teaches you your basic fundamental laws and rights, your basic fundamental rights against the law, against what is due process, what is a fair trial, what is impartiality, what is the job of a judge, what is the job of the prosecution. Like, all these things people should know coming out of high school, but they don't. But I guarantee you they do know pronouns. This is another problem. So Julie Kelly said the Garland/Ray FBI is paying FBI informants and undercover officers to set up vending booths at gun shows to lure Second A supporting Americans into pretending to want to commit crimes of mass violence. This is how the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is spending its time. So number 12 on the charging document, it has on January 20th, 2024, the FBI observed Prieto drive to a gun show in Phoenix, Arizona. Prieto was observed entering the gun show with 2 rifles. Prieto met and had discussions with various vendors before contacting the CHS and an undercover FBI agent at the CHS's vendor booth. What? So they're setting up booths now at gun shows? Folks, no, man. This is exactly why I wanted to do this show. But I want to warn my fellow Americans that you have a rogue intel agency out there trying to entrap innocent American people. Is this guy innocent? I don't know. But he is innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. So yes, he is innocent. Did he plan all this stuff? We don't know. But apparently the FBI, this grand jury, seem to think he's already guilty. They're not letting him out of jail. And I just find it so just shocking that we're going through this stuff. So, here's another thing by Julie Kelly. In the charging document on line 25, during the show, Prieto responded, yeah, we got to do it, when asked by the undercover if the planned attack was all talk or if they were going to do it. Wait a minute, so the undercover says, hey, is this all talk? Are we actually going to do this? Like, I don't know, man. I just don't like the way this looks at all. At all. So line 26 in the charging document, Prieto also told the undercover that it may not be May when they do the attack, maybe June or July, Prieto stated. Quote, the hotter the weather, the better, because people will want to be outside more. When it gets hot, people can't think straight. Prieto responded, yeah. When asked by the UC if the timeline was pushed to June, would State Farm Arena still be the target venue? Wow, man, this certainly doesn't good, man. So it sounds like the undercover was asking if, since he's pushing it back till June, is the State Farm Arena still going to be the target? My God, man. I just don't like the look of this at all. So in charging line 21, Prieto also stated he wanted to make clear that the attack was not a gang-related thing. Prieto wanted it clear that the attack was racially motivated. Prieto stated he wanted to put Confederate flags at the location of the attack and to shout out, Whitey's out here killing. What's we gonna do? KKK all the way. And the black lives don't matter. White lives matter. What? Man. Listen, I get a very, like I said, I would bet a large sum of money that this whole thing was concocted by this undercover agent in the FBI. Why do I get that feeling? Is because apparently the communications between the FBI and the undercover agents won't be released in court. Maybe they know that from the Gretchen Whitmer plot. As you can see, in 2 trials, the judge will not allow the communication messages to be submitted as evidence. So maybe the FBI knows that, and just so long as they keep those communications under wraps, how is anybody going to know whether the FBI and the undercover concocted this plot to create this mass shooting, or was it Prieto, the defendant, the American citizen? How are we ever going to know that if these people aren't releasing the communications because the judge is not allowing it to be submitted as evidence? Like, I would be extremely pissed if a judge did not allow the communication messages to be submitted as evidence between what the undercover agent and the FBI was talking about. Like, it is clear and obvious at this point that the FBI concocted the entire Gretchen Whitmer plot. So why can we honestly sit there and say that we don't think they concocted this plot? Of course they probably did. And that's unfortunate. That's why it's unfortunate we have a politicized intel agency now. The FBI is political, the CIA is political, the DHS is political, NIAID's political, Dr. Fauci, he's political. It's all political now, man. It's all about politics. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some of the most corrupt institutions in our federal government that the American people are paying for. We must weed out this rot, root and branch, man. We must get rid of this corruption, or we're not going to have a country left. And in fact, that's exactly what Donald Trump is saying he's going to do. I think that's probably one of the most appealing things to voting for him, is just getting rid of this corruption, purging these institutions, and getting this nasty, disgusting stuff out. I am sorry, I don't want any FBI agents working at the FBI that their top priority is to entrap American citizens and to create plots in order to entrap American citizens into committing a crime they wouldn't have otherwise committed. I just don't think that's a good way. I don't think that's a good thing for a country. I just don't. I mean, call me crazy, but I just don't think it's a good thing. I think that's very bad, and it's going to lead to the collapse of this country if somebody doesn't get out there and clean all this stuff out. And listen, judges too. These federal judges, they're all in Washington, D.C. They all eat dinner with one another. You guys know how the system works. Anybody that's been wrapped up into the court system, or it's been, that's been into the courts, has been into any type of trouble, you know how the system works. They give you some bullcrap plea deal that the prosecution and the defense attorney worked out at dinner. The prosecution has dinner with the judge. They all know one another. They go to the same parties. They help each other out, do each other's favors, and it's just a revolving door. Our justice system has become a joke. It has become a revolving door of plea deals. I think plea deals are disgusting. And the bad thing is you go against a plea deal and you get sent to trial and you get a judge like this that won't allow evidence in. Guess what? Your sentence is going to be 15 times worse. And the worst part about it is you could be innocent the entire time, but the judge is going to make sure you don't get a jury of your peers. A judge is going to make sure that there's evidence that isn't submitted that proves your innocence. This is how far we've come in our justice system. And so what happens is people sign the plea deal. They say, okay, I did it, because they don't feel like spending 25 years in prison if they get found guilty by a jury not of their peers, but by random people that a prosecution can whip up into an emotional frenzy and send you away for the rest of your life. That's the justice system we have now. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. I mean, look at what happened to Donald Trump, man. I mean, if there is not bigger proof of our justice system being absolutely corrupted to its core, just take a look at New York City's court system and what they did to Donald Trump. That was a complete and utter disgrace. A show trial. Some Soviet Union level stuff, man. And that's why people sign plea deals. They don't want to have to deal with all that. It's quite crazy. that you're admitting to something you didn't do. All because you're given an ultimatum of sign this piece of paper and you can go free now, or don't sign this paper and risk spending 35 years in prison. Gee, what a hard decision to make. And then when you sign your name on that dot, you have officially admitted to something you didn't actually do. All because of the corrupt system and the justice system that we have in this country now. Because it's not about justice, it's about revenue. The same reason why they give seatbelt tickets and speeding tickets at the beginning and end of the month. The same reason why there's quotas for police precincts. It's all about money now. It has nothing to do with justice anymore. And now, unfortunately our court systems, our justice system has officially been politicized, at least in New York City and Washington, D.C. Look at all the J6 prisoners. I mean, what do they got? Like 750 people sitting in prison now charged? I mean, there's like what? And they're searching for thousands of more people, hunting Americans down across the country. People that went to go protest and petition their government on January 6th because they believe that their election was rigged and stolen from them. And I'm sorry, but I believe them too. That election was rigged. That was a shady-ass election. I don't care what anybody says. The amount of irregularities, the impossibilities that happened in that election, no one truly believes Joe Biden got 81 million votes, right? So does that mean that I should be sent to jail for questioning an election? Does that mean when I go to petition my government because they screwed up our elections, because I petition my government, I should be considered a domestic terrorist and should have to be hunted down by the government's Department of Justice? This is nuts, the stuff we're dealing with, but that is what's happening. And unfortunately, we have millions of people in this country, Democrats, the left, they just don't see it that way. They are perfectly happy with Republicans being persecuted all across the land. You should hear them talk about Ashley Babbitt. I mean, the level of disgust, all right? It really is. These people are pieces of trash, man. They are sick, hateful, spiteful people. All for what? Because the American people wanted to vote for Donald Trump? And is it really that hard for them to understand why somebody would want to vote for Donald Trump? I mean, he gave them cheap gas. He saved them money. He created record numbers of jobs. He created peace, prosperity. I mean, these people act like Trump voters are voting for him just because he's Donald Trump. No, they're voting for his policies, man. I mean, can you blame them? What would be really crazy is if Donald Trump got us into multiple foreign conflicts, crashed the economy, got 13 soldiers killed in Afghanistan, has been involved in multiple scandals with his son and corruption in foreign business deals. I could see if they still wanted to vote for Donald Trump after he did all of those things, I could see them being in like some cult or something. Because why would you vote for something like that? I mean, especially if you don't get any benefit from it. But that's not the case. In fact, that's actually Joe Biden that did all this stuff. And you have Democrats chomping at the bit to go vote for it again. And they call Donald Trump voters in a cult. It's not that hard to understand why Trump voters would vote for Donald Trump. He gave them the best country, the best economy, and the peace and prosperity that they have seen in decades. Is it really all that hard to understand why they would vote for him? What I find very hard to understand is why anybody would vote for Joe Biden. Somebody that got 13 soldiers killed in Afghanistan, checked his watch as the flag-draped coffins were rolling off of the plane, completely ruined our economy, issued mask mandates and vaccine mandates all across the country. What else we got here? Got us into multiple foreign conflicts, mumbles and bumbles his way through speeches, falls off of stages, walks randomly into the woods, shakes hands with ghosts. And the people that want to vote for that again are not considered a cult? No, man. No, people that want to vote for peace and prosperity are a lot more sane and rational than somebody that would want to vote for this for another 4 years. That's all I'm going to say. Anybody that knowingly votes for their own destruction, there's something wrong with them. All right. I don't see anything wrong with the Trump voter wanting to vote for another 4 years of peace and prosperity, which is what they got for the 4 years they had him the last time. It's not all that crazy to think why these people would want to vote for him again. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to get into another segment right after this. I just wanted to warn my fellow Americans, my listeners, that if you're going to gun shows, just keep your head on a swivel, man. Watch your six. There may be FBI undercover agents setting up booths. And so I know that none of my listeners would do anything sketchy anyways, but I find it very, very concerning that we have federal agents setting up booths at gun shows to try and entrap people or to try and talk people into committing crimes they wouldn't otherwise would have committed if the FBI undercover informants weren't coercing them to do so. So, once again, keep your head on a swivel. If you're going to gun shows, watch your, do what you do. I know none of my listeners are doing anything sketchy anyways. In fact, I find what the FBI is doing way more sketchy. You know what I mean? Like, don't people find that a bit sketchy? A federal agency setting up a booth at a gun show and then what? Talking to random people about conducting a mass shooting? Like, how does that conversation even start anyways? Exactly. Something's not right with that whole thing. Anyways, we'll get more into it whenever there's more information released. I'll keep an eye on Julie Kelly, see what she's releasing. She's releasing documents, man, like a fax machine. She's just dropping these things by the minute. And so she's on top of all these cases. And make sure you stay tuned for the next episode. I want to clear some things up from a video I posted to TikTok. I want to clear a common narrative up about Joe Biden and his willful retention of classified documents. Yes, we're going to go over it again. I actually printed off some pages of the Robert Hur report, and so I will read verbatim what was said in that report so we can clear the fog here and maybe fix some, maybe inform some lefties out there about Joe Biden's willful retention of classified documents, but he's not being charged. So we're going to go through that a little bit on the next segment, and then there's so much stuff we got to get into. I want to get into this Joe Biden giving amnesty to 500,000 illegal immigrants. Yeah, kind of weird thing to do 5 months before a federal election, don't you think? I think their plan has come to fruition, and it's never been clearer than it is right now. Now, the American people know exactly the purpose for opening our southern borders, and it's to cheat in another election. I mean, there's no other way around it. I don't see any other motives than that. And that's exactly what's happening. So I want to get into what just happened with this amnesty thing that everybody's talking about. We'll go into the details, how he's doing it, why he did it, all that good stuff. So make sure you tune into that. If you want to get a hold of me directly, get a hold of me at StephenTorrielloShow@gmail.com. Follow the podcast on any major podcast platforms. You can find the show anywhere. And leave a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate it. And I will talk to you guys here in a little bit. So once again, thank you for tuning in. God bless you, and God bless America. You guys have a good one. Bye-bye.